Hello, I'm back again with another tip. I take the styrofoam balls and I cut them in half. And in order to keep up with all of my plastic needles, the students will have the plastic needles inserted into a styrofoam ball or half of a styrofoam ball because I need them to sit flat on the table. And I'll put 4 in one because I have 4 students sitting at each table. This is great for sitting in the middle of the table, and it allows me to keep count of my needles. It keeps students responsible as well. I'll say, okay, table that you have the green needles, I need to make sure that 4 needles come back because these are so easy to lose. So I do want them to come back. So I have them stick them in the styrofoam ball, and I have one for each table. I do love being able to have them sorted by color. When it comes to threading the needle, there is a very small hole there where the students have to insert the yarn, and that becomes very tricky because when kids try to insert the yarn, many times they'll take that in and they'll try to stick it in, and it becomes very frayed. The ends just start to fall apart. So what I do tell students to do is to fold the yarn in half, and they end up with a very tiny loop, and then they take that loop and kind of push it in with their nail, push the loop through, and once the loop begins to show on the other side of that needle, they pull it through until the shorter piece of the yarn comes through. And now my yarn is threaded. Whether they're sewing on a piece of paper or whether they're even sewing on a plastic grid, and I do allow the students to do that, using it to make like a bookmark on a plastic grid. Sometimes my students will want to finish at home. I let them know that they can finish at home, but I do not send home the needles. But I do give them another tip. I tell them that if they take a bottle of wet liquid glue, they are able to just put a dab of glue on the end of the yarn. And once they start to twirl it between the fingers, and they do that for about a minute or so, a few seconds, and then they just keep twirling it until it gets nice and pointy at the end, and then let it dry. Once it's dry, it'll be very, very hard, almost like the end of a shoestring. And then they're able to use it, and that will allow them to sew. So this one is dried on this end, and it works out really, really well. And then they're able to actually sew with that on a plastic grid. Now, it will not work on paper, so they do have to actually have a needle in order to finish a project on paper. But as far as finishing a project that's on a plastic grid, if they don't have a needle at home, putting that glue on the end of the yarn will make it work. And they are able to finish up at home, and they can do it all by themselves.